When I look at what's happening in our culture, in our country, I think I see so much anger, and I think that the anger is associated with loneliness. Every time I go to a conference and I go to a session, a presentation on chronic loneliness, what is the number one reason people are chronically lonely? Because they live alone. Because I deeply believe that we are not meant to live alone, that this is an aberration of modern Western civilization. We have, as a culture, gotten to this place where we believe that if I am an adult and I am single, that is not in a relationship, not living with family, I am supposed to live alone. So my exhortation is the risk is worth it.
Yeah.
The risk is worth it. Do it with your eyes open, do it carefully, talk to people, but it is worth doing.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 46, I spoke with Annamarie Pluhar, who runs a nonprofit organization named Sharing Housing. She's the author of a book titled Sharing Housing, a guidebook for finding and keeping good housemates, which extols the virtues of sharing housing and provides practical advice on how to find compatible housemates. Earlier this year, I posted a blog article where I estimated that the number of empty bedrooms in Boulder is approximately 30,000 using census data. Recently, Boulder City Council updated the occupancy restrictions, which could potentially make it easier to make better use of those empty bedrooms. I think now is a great time to pivot from occupancy reform to thinking about vacancy reform. This episode is the first in a series that I hope to produce, addressing the need to make better use of our available housing stock and practical strategies for doing so. In my conversation with Annamarie, she details 5 benefits of sharing housing and shares strategies for finding a good housemate. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Annamarie Pluhar.
We ain't throwing starfish here, now we're having a good party. Talking about structural change. We believe the land is sacred, even beneath that vacant parking lot, where the weeds are doing their best to express the need for something different. Gonna make some space for you and me to live here all together. Gonna make it safe and fun for kids to get around the town. Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder.
Annamarie, welcome to Sharing Boulder. Thank you so much for making time for this this evening. Maybe take just a minute to introduce yourself and tell us where you are and what you do.
So thank you very much for having me here. I live in southern Vermont near Brattleboro. That's the southeast corner of the state. And I am about advocating for people to do something very simple to say, but complex to actually implement, which is share housing. It's that simple. It's like living under a roof together, sharing a kitchen, and just having that community and sense of participation in a home that I think we are sadly missing in our culture for so many people.
Yeah, well, and you run a nonprofit called Sharing Housing.
I do.
I love the name. You know, it's a great name. But I want to tell you that you are the first, I believe, I was looking at some of the previous podcasts. I believe you're our first guest on the podcast that's not in Boulder County, from Boulder County. So,
I feel honored.
Yeah, so thank you for blazing a trail here on the podcast. Yeah, I became aware of your work through the Strong Towns episode that they had you on their podcast. And of course, the name really stuck out for me because we had just launched a podcast about 6 months before I had heard your episode called Sharing, We're Sharing Boulder. And Yeah, so I love the name and I love the concept. Um, I, I don't know if you don't mind me just giving a little intro to why I care about this issue so much.
By all means.
Boulder has kind of multiple narratives that we talk about as we talk about housing. You know, there's people who feel like Boulder is full to the max, and that all this new housing that's going in is ruining things, and all the traffic that comes in from out of town is choking the streets, and Boulder is full, full, full. You know, and one of the interesting things is that despite adding units to Boulder every year for the last, forever, our population has plateaued for about 5 to 7 years. We haven't grown in population, which is kind of a head scratcher. And so another narrative around Boulder is that there's a lot of people who are aging and aging in place and living in large homes that are nearly empty, themselves,
Yes.
and maybe one
I
other
know it will.
person.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of another narrative that, hey, a bunch of our neighborhoods are kind of emptying out. There's no children in those neighborhoods, and the schools are suffering precipitously declining enrollments. And so, yeah, we have kind of multiple ways that we look at ourselves. And I would love, like, when environmentalists, we all are concerned about climate change in Boulder. We're a very liberal, progressive town on the balance. And one of the things that I'm always advocating for is more opportunities for people to live near where they work and near the places that they go, so that they're just not stuck in their cars driving all the time.
Here, here.
And a lot of those houses that are kind of nearly empty are in just these wonderful locations that are in what could be really vibrant neighborhoods, but are actually kind of the population's imploding to some extent. So, anyways, that was kind of the tee up for why. What I want to do. Oh, and another thing that kind of contextualizes this conversation is Boulder has had occupancy restrictions in place for a very long time that limit the number of unrelated people that can live together. And just last month, City Council didn't do away with the occupancy restriction, but they liberalized it so that instead of 3 unrelated people, it's 5. And so that's a big difference for us. And so I've been thinking about ways that we can shift from occupancy reform to what I like to call vacancy reform, because we have a lot of empty bedrooms in our community, and I think we need more imagination and more ideas about how to share that living space that's in most cases already climate controlled, already built, sitting there waiting for people to occupy it. So
Yes.
Maybe I hope this resonates with you. I assume it does. And
Of course it does.
yeah.
Of course it does. I mean, this is a problem. Actually, it's not just Boulder, it's everywhere. The boomers, of which I am one, are retiring and living in the houses that they raised their families in. And in many cases, got in their divorce and now are single, or maybe they lost their husband. Mostly it's women living by themselves, not always, but often. And there are empty bedrooms. And so my campaign is to try to convince people that living together is better for everybody. And I say that there are 5 benefits for living in shared housing. And maybe I'm going to hold off for that second and come back to the stat is that 27% of all households in this country are single occupancy. I didn't look it up for Boulder, but I know that in my county, Windham County of Vermont, 20% of all households are occupied by seniors living alone.
Interesting.
That's 1 out of 5. It'd be very interesting to know what the Boulder stat is, and I might have looked it up before this.
I know how to look it up, so I can add this to the
Go look it up.
info. Yeah.
Go look it up because the number is quite astonishing. And the reason that this is true is that we have, as a culture, gotten to this place where we believe that if I am an adult and I am single, that is not in a relationship, not living with family, I am supposed to live alone.
Wow.
That it is the appropriate thing to do as an adult, because I need to be independent and I need to be self-reliant, because that's what adults do in our culture.
Yeah,
It's
there's
the
something kind of
cowboy on the prairie, right?
there's something kind of juvenile about having to have a
Yeah,
roommate with somebody. It's
exactly.
like a lesser relationship in
It is
the
considered, yeah, we
hierarchy.
all think of it as a lesson. And let me be very clear that I am not advocating for adults to have roommates, because I think that roommates are for camp and for college and maybe conferences where you share a room in a hotel.
Okay.
But adults are housemates. And my goal is to convince people that it is possible to have a relationship that I call a homemate relationship. That's homemate.
Yep.
And my definition of a homemate is somebody whom you like and respect, and those pieces are really important, whose ways of living at home are compatible enough that everybody is comfortable. And so that my goal is to have people have homemates, because I deeply believe that we are not meant to live alone. That this is an aberration of modern Western civilization. It's not true in third worlds. It's not true in Asian cultures. But it is definitely white, Anglo-Saxon, European, this notion that as adults we live alone, but it's not good for us. And we have an epidemic of chronic loneliness in this country. The Surgeon General has just put out a framework for addressing chronic loneliness. And every time I go to a conference and I go to a session, a presentation on chronic loneliness, what is the number one reason people are chronically lonely? Because they live alone.
Yeah.
All right. And chronic loneliness is really powerfully hurtful. Now, I am not saying that people who live alone are always going to be chronically lonely, right? There are people who are very good at keeping a social calendar going and being connected to people and so on. But it is hard in our culture to have a spontaneous social connection that has not been planned through text or telephone. We don't drop in on each other. We don't run into each other because we drive cars. It's just really hard. And I think one of the things that COVID has done for us is made people become aware of how much we actually need other people in our lives. So in the 12 years I've been working on this since my book was published, I've seen an attitudinal shift. People are more interested in this notion of sharing. So there's lots of good reasons for doing it. I will go back now to my
please.
5 benefits and say that the obvious first benefit is housing costs. It's very simple. When you share housing, you spend less on your housing, whether or not you are the homeowner, householder, as I call them, or the home seeker. You're just going to be spending less. And of course, everything has gotten super expensive in the housing market. So people are beginning to think about this and look at this in the sort of transactional way. I'll spend less. I can afford. But go ahead. You want to have a question?
I was thinking about how, when anytime that property taxes, the notion of raising property taxes comes up in the public discourse, there's always the kind of prototype complainer or objector, I should say, is someone who lives by themselves on a fixed income, and they feel like they will become but they own their house, and they feel like they will become housing insecure if their property taxes go up. And
Sure.
I don't want to make people insecure in their housing, but sometimes I think about like this person's peers, like truly housing insecure peers who are struggling to find an apartment they can afford based on their fixed income. I sometimes think, like there's kind of a real discrepancy between the kind of housing insecurity that manifests, and so I love this idea of, maybe you could have a roommate to help you pay your property.
Fix that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're changing my vocabulary today. Thank you for doing this. A housemate, or even better, a homemate.
Right. So a homemate is a mature housemate relationship.
Yeah, right.
You move in together, you're housemates. But over time, it is my expectation that people of good heart who like and respect each other, who have comfort around how they live in their home, develop a feeling for each other that becomes homemate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So yeah, there is a huge mismatch right now between the housing insecure and those who have housing but may not actually feel financially secure. And that's another problem, which is money. People are embarrassed or ashamed to admit that they don't have enough.
Yeah.
We don't talk about money in our culture. I got a call in the spring from somebody who thought I could help. So a friend of a friend of a friend. And the story was...
You must have thousands of those.
I do get those
at this point.
Friends of friends. In this case, is an elderly woman who lives in my small town, 1,600 people in Dummerston, Vermont, owns her house outright and couldn't pay her property taxes. And so she took out a reverse mortgage. What happened? Well, the bank started paying her property tax, but then charging her interest on the loan that they were giving her. I don't quite understand all of this. I didn't get into it deeply. But by the time I was called, she was going to be foreclosed on.
Ouch.
In 10 days. I don't know what happened to it. Prior to the bank getting involved, she was always able to negotiate with the town and say, I'll pay my taxes. And the town was like, yeah, we know you will, and all of that. And what I wanted is like, couldn't she have 5 years previously started to live in shared housing, have somebody move in who could pay her a rent that would enable her to pay her property taxes? So cost is so basic. And also for people who are housing insecure or even unhoused and working, being able to move into a room for $400 or $500 a month would be life-saving, literally life-saving. Yeah. Right? So people start sharing housing for the benefits of cost. They stick around for the benefits of the companionship, the company. And I am not talking about best friends forever, and I am not talking about being glued at the hips. I am talking about independence, people coming and going, their own schedule, they're adults, but there's somebody who might say, how was your day? Oh, it sucked. And you have just a little chit chat. It makes so much difference. I also think that if we could ever get the stats on it, that we would discover that people sleep better when there's somebody else under the roof, because there's kind of existential anxiety about all of that kind of stuff. But that's all speculation. I have no research studies on that one. But the companionship piece can be significant.
You've been doing this long enough to have powerful intuition, so it's okay to share those.
I've been thinking about it for a long time.
Yeah.
And let's see, the third benefit is simply help around the house. Yeah. One of the things that happens in couples or in families is people participate in keeping the house going, taking out the trash, getting the lawn mowed, cleaning out the dishwasher, putting away the all of that.
Every single day.
Right. And if you're living by yourself, you do it all by yourself.
Yeah.
If you have somebody else in the house, it gets shared. You get more than two people, it gets shared more ways. And I mean, that's my ideal, that's my expectation, right?
Yeah, right.
So there's that kind of help. Let's see. Oh,
Well, and
sustain.
yard work, for example, gets more difficult as you age, so if
So does carrying shopping bags in from the car.
yeah, yeah, of course.
There's another piece which I stumbled on. There's a Facebook group called Elder Orphans, and very provocative name, right?
Yeah, right.
And the idea is these people are in this group who literally are without family and they're by themselves. And there was a huge long thread about what do you do when you go to the hospital for a procedure and they don't want to release you because there's nobody at home.
Right.
And people were talking about all the different ruses that they went through to get the hospital to let them go home.
To
But
escape.
if you have a housemate, there's somebody home. There's no problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's another piece of the help, which is that, there's help doing the daily tasks and maintenance of home. There's help like, can you feed the cat if I go away for the weekend?
Yeah.
That's really easy to ask a housemate to do, assuming that they have agreed that this is something they're willing to take on. It's much harder to ask a friend to come across town to feed your cat twice a day. So that's sort of one kind of help. And then the far end of the help is like the hospital thing or being found if you fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that really basic thing. So there's all that help stuff. So my fourth reason for shared housing is sustainability. I would imagine that many in the Boulder audience already get that. You're using less of the earth's resources. You need one toaster, one iron, one blender, it's coffee machine. You get the picture. Yeah. And then finally, or not finally, but my fifth benefit is one that comes from me and it comes from my past and background, and that it is that I believe that as human beings, we exist to give and to receive. That the participation in giving to others and receiving from others is what gives us joy and love and life.
Do you mean that in kind of a spiritual way or theological way? Or
it's a spirit. This is a spiritual thing entirely. And I think that if we don't get to do that on a regular basis, we kind of shrivel up.
Yeah. Our
souls shrivel up because it's not who we are. So I call that whole person health. Nice. That's the one I call. So those are my 5 good reasons why I think it's a great idea for people to live in shared housing. And so I'll let you ask a question.
Oh yeah, well I love those reasons. One of the things I've often said is that living with other people is messy, but it's worth it. And kind of to your point about the nourishment that you get from being with other people is like we really have kind of a culture that has rewarded this independence thinking, and then if you're by yourself, then stay by yourself and you can do it and soldier through. And the notion that we all need to soldier on lonely is like that's a recipe for a lot of pathology. Yeah.
And anger.
Yeah.
When I look at what's happening in our culture, in our country, I think I see so much anger, and I think that the anger is associated with loneliness.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a direct connection, but I think there's something.
Well, what that makes me think of is kind of something adjacent to that, and this may sound a little flippant, but one thing that I've observed is that crazy people talk to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to not be crazy, I know that's not a PC word. I probably shouldn't use that word, except that that's how it's how it's spoken about. When you talk to yourself, but we all have these narratives in our brain that we tell ourselves that need a third party to help us sort through what we're saying to ourselves. And when you speak those narratives to other people, it's good for you. It helps you think through all these things that you're thinking. And so, anyways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was just thinking about how I've a number of people have said, yeah, I talk to myself because I live alone.
What do you say?
Yeah. No, there was something I was going to say about what you were saying. It'll come back to me.
Okay. Well, so the benefits are easy to accept. And of course, like they're easy for me. They sound great to me.
Right.
How do you find a housemate that is going to work?
That is the $64,000 question.
Uh-huh.
Let me back up a little bit and tell your audience that I wrote my book, Sharing Housing, a guidebook for finding and keeping good housemates, out of my personal experience of living in shared housing for almost my entire adult life.
Nice.
And I wrote it after I realized that I had developed a process or framework that made me feel safe in interviewing people and that was fast and efficient. And I thought, oh, nobody's written about this. I'm going to write a book. So I wrote a book, and one thing led to another. So the framework is really about getting clear on understanding who you are, what you must have, what you can't live with in your home, because those are your guardrails. And the number of people who haven't ever even thought that they were allowed to state what it was they wanted in their home surprises me. But it is a very important piece. And that kind of starts the process. So you got to know who you are, what you want, what you can't live with. And then from there, there's a process for developing an announcement that attracts people that might be a good fit. I ask people to talk on the telephone before they meet in person, because you can tell a lot about a person by talking to them. And not email, not text, talk.
But that seems like a good step, because you want rejection to be kind of easy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is the place where you're, and I'm big on trusting your gut and empowering people to listen to their gut, because sometimes, and I've talked to people. I have blog posts on my website, which is sharinghousing.com. And I have interviewed lots of different people, real people sharing housing. And I have had people say, yeah, I had this horrible housemate and I couldn't wait to get rid of her. And I go, okay, let's talk about what your interview process was like. And invariably, I will find that there was a place that person was like, oh, I didn't like that. Oh, I can live with it. And they turned out they couldn't live with it. So you have to pay attention to this stuff. From there, it's assuming that the home seeker likes the space that's being offered by the householder. And that's an important piece, because sometimes you take one look at a room or a space and go, can't do this. I don't want this, right? No. Then it's a question of how compatible you are around some very basic nitty-gritty. This is not rocket science stuff. Cleanliness, neatness, kitchen use, routines, tasks, guests, noise, and bills, and climate.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
9 factors. And you talk your way through those 9 factors and find out if you are compatible enough that you can live together. So in my process, I want people to do that after they've made sure that their must-haves and can't live withs are met. And a story that I tell is that once I was being interviewed live on radio, and the person interviewing me said, well, I tried shared housing after I got my divorce and it didn't work out. I left after 6 months. And I said, well, may I ask you some questions about that? 5. And she said, yeah. And I said, so what was your interview process like? And she said, well, it was great. I loved the house. I loved the location. I really liked the people. I saw the dirty dishes in the sink and I thought, oh, I can live with that. Well, 6 months later, she was moving out because she couldn't live with that.
Yeah.
And it had become a big source of contention because naturally those people who were already living there, who were leaving their dirty dishes in the sink and it wasn't a problem, did not feel like she had any authority to tell them that they couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, well, there's multiple ways of thinking about what the purpose of the kitchen sink is. Some people think it's for washing dishes.
Some people do, and some people for collecting dishes.
Yeah,
now,
exactly,
if she had said to herself, I can't stand dirty dishes in the sink, this is a must-have, or I can't live with,
Mm-hmm.
when she had the telephone conversation, she would have said, so I don't like dirty dishes in the sink. And they would have said, well, we have dirty dishes in the sink. And she should have said, no, it's okay. Thank you. I'm moving on.
Yeah.
Done. And not 6 months of Sturm und Drang. And then perhaps losing the whole idea that living in shared housing is something that she could do.
Yeah.
So I am really big on this basic.
Well, and if she had gone over there, if you go over there first and spend an hour with them, you can develop emotional attachments quickly to people, and then you don't want to reject them and say, oh, but I don't like your dirty dishes. I think that's why the phone call makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Right.
And she loved the location, she loved the people, she loved all of that. She just couldn't. So that's why must-haves and can't live with are so deeply important. I do teach a class on this. I call it Discovering Shared Housing. And as it so happens, I was supposed to start a class today, on Wednesday, what's the day? The 20th. But my power went out.
Oh, no.
And as a result, we're postponing the start of the class another week. I don't know when this is whether people will hear this in time.
Probably not. It takes me about a week to get it out. Sorry.
Fair enough. But I also have an online class, 24/7. It's me talking all this stuff.
Self-paced curriculum.
Self-paced curriculum, because so many people said to me, I want to take this class, but I can't meet at whatever time it is.
Yeah.
So we did that effort. And I also have a newsletter, and I would love people to sign up for the newsletter. You can find it on the main page of our website. And newsletter is one way that people can kind of stay in touch with this idea and think about it and chew on it for a while. Yeah. And it's designed to help people kind of stay in the game a little bit and think about it, because it's a hard transition. Yeah. I recognize that it is a hard transition.
So I'm kind of curious, what kind of success have you had? Is it all anecdotal, or do you have some statistics about how many housemates have come together through your efforts? Or
I have no statistics. I don't run a program nationally. Yeah. I have a small program here that I'm trying out in Windham and Windsor counties of Vermont, called Shift. Which is designed to incentivize homeowners to open up their houses. That's the hard part. It's the people who already are living in a space, helping them make the transition to thinking about how they might have somebody with them. And sadly, what happens is people only start doing that when they realize that they can't live by themselves anymore because they need so much help. But at that point, it's already too late to have a housemate. At that point, they need a caregiver. So
Right.
I'm trying to get people to think about this before they need it, because having a housemate can postpone the need for a caregiver just because the person's around. You don't age as fast because
There's
you've got
that.
some
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. So yeah.
That's great. Well, in Boulder, in the conversations I've been a part of, when we talk about sharing housing, it's often in the context of non-conforming families or co-ops for younger people, and
Mhm.
um, I just feel like we haven't had much discourse around all this housing that is kind of lightly utilized, and the number of I don't want to characterize people I don't know as being lonely, but I am concerned about my city as being a place that has lonely people in it, right? And
You also have a large university, do you not?
we have a large university too. That's right. Yeah.
So it sounds like it wouldn't be so hard to stand up a program that helped match up homeowners with bedrooms for students.
It's
And there's
it,
actually a program called Nesterly that started in Boston. That's an online thing that is working on doing exactly that. The advantage of for homeowners of thinking about doing this is that students will leave.
yeah.
That's a disadvantage, but when you're thinking about it, when you start, it's like, okay, it's not forever.
So tend to have
And
stronger bodies and are able to push
stronger bodies
doors
and
and
help with technology
yeah,
and
exactly.
all of that. And there are lots and lots of totally responsible, lovely students who need housing and need relatively cheap housing.
Well, it would
Uh,
be lovely to get some of that going in Boulder. I wonder how much actually is already happening, but it's
probably more than
it's a kind of
we know.
it's kind of a loaded proposition to go out in the community and say, hey, you should let students into your houses, because there's so much when we talk about. I mean, there's a lot of conflict in the discourse about housing and what we should do to make Boulder more affordable. And one of the boogeymen is all the students and how they compete in the rental market, and they push out families, and yeah, there tends to be a resistance against bringing students into our community, rather in the way that you've suggested. So it's kind of
That's too bad.
yeah.
That is, I really think that is too bad, because those bedrooms are there.
Yeah.
and it's and the idea that it's more short term, and anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a trick. This whole housing thing is really, really tricky. And we're in such a weird space. I mean, some of it, how housing got to be so difficult, has lots of different elements to it. But almost nobody talks about population growth. Simply population growth. I mean, the population of the United States has doubled since I was born. Doubled.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, everybody's living longer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I go around, I'm a regular church goer, and I sometimes sort of look around and I just go, I just, the medical miracles. I think that person, cataracts, hip surgeries, knee surgeries, stents, cancer treatments, and so on. People who would have died and their spaces would have become available. We don't talk about that. Hello.
Yeah. Well, I think when you think about the climate crisis and the way we've extracted so much from the planet to sustain a large populations, very large lifestyles. There's definitely a lot of anti-growth sentiment in Boulder. Because thinking about the climate, my pushback on that is always like, well, even if the population were steady, and I think that's a good goal to have, and I'm pretty sure our birth rates suggest that it is. Most population growth at this point is from immigration. But even if the population was steady, there's still good reasons for some areas to grow and some areas to shrink in population because of the way that our cities are structured and how unsustainable a lot of the built environment is that we've created in suburban sprawl. And
Yep.
I think of Boulder as being a really wonderful example of a place that could be very sustainable because we have a thriving economic core. And if we could, stop spreading our reach in the suburbs and quit paving over all these beautiful meadows that exist on the Front Range,
Right.
and focus more on having compact urban cores that are walkable and need less cars and all that kind of thing. That's
A lot of strong towns.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So,
Right.
but yeah, I'm definitely also concerned about population growth in aggregate. But I'm actually very bullish about increasing the population in Boulder as a way to mitigate growth in other areas that are not
Uh-huh.
less sustainable. So,
Allow for density.
well, I'm curious. How does so you have a .org and a .com,
Yes.
which kind of suggests you have like a nonprofit and a commercial flavors to
So,
what
so
you're
the
doing.
history of this is that when I started writing my book, which I started in 2008,
Hmm.
um, a savvy friend said, "You need a website." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I created sharinghousing.com. And sharinghousing.com has been in existence since 2008. So I don't know how many years that is. 25, 15.
15.
Um, and then my book came out in 2011, and I worked on the issue as sort of a solopreneur, author type person until 2017, when I was like, okay, yes, this really is a social mission. This is a nonprofit. I will make a nonprofit, and which I hadn't wanted to do for various reasons, but it's been a good choice because the reaction to what I'm doing is completely different as a nonprofit. But I didn't get very creative about naming things. And so I just said, all right, we need a nonprofit face. It's the .org, sharinghousing.org.
Okay.
But I didn't want to lose .com because we already had a lot of stuff on it. And we also had some clout in the search engines and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why the two.
Oh, okay. What I was expecting you to say is that the .com website is where you make money. If and the
Oh,
org
I
is
wish
where
I
you.
was making money. But it is where our resources are. It
Yeah.
is where people can buy the books.
Okay.
In addition to the book that I wrote, which is also available on Amazon, Sharing Housing, a guidebook for finding and keeping good housemates. I sell a workbook. We sell a workbook that goes with that. That's just got sheets. The book itself has worksheets at the end of every chapter, but it's small,
Yeah.
so this makes it big and people can really use it. It has some other things in it too. And then there's an interviewing guide that we sell separately, which also has a little questionnaire in it for people to use as part of verifying or having the conversation about those nitty-gritty things. So I call that a kit, the Sharing Housing Kit, and we sell that online. Sell the course, Sharing Housing 101, sell Discovering Sharing Housing, and then free newsletter and blog posts and all of that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm curious about that all sounds great. If you're an individual who finds out about it and cares about it and wants to know more, maybe they'll pull out their wallet and But when I think about how your ideas could get purchased in Boulder, like take hold, I wonder like if you work with city staff or nonprofits to like promote I would think that we could sure word of mouth send you to your website and people could organically do this. But I also kind of feel like some sort of citywide or like programming of some kind that incentivized or helped educate large numbers of people. So I'm kind of curious what works along those lines.
I'm still trying to figure out what works along those lines.
Okay.
In general, around shared housing, most people think about having matching programs. So bringing people, doing the screening on both sides and then bringing people together. And there are, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50 programs like that around the country. Most of them struggle for funding. So finding funding to do this is difficult. I mentioned that I have a little program here, which is my attempt to figure this out. We call it SHIFT, Shared Housing Incentives for Taking Action. And the idea is that people can take the courses online. When they register, they get them for free. And then they get a consult about how to make their home better for shared housing. And then the idea is, with support, that they find their own housemate, but with the support, meaning we will look at announcements, we will help edit, we will listen to what happened in an interview, that kind of a thing. And then when they come back to us with a housemate and an agreement that we can witness, we will reimburse the homeowner up to $500 for changes that they made in their home to make it more comfortable for sharing. So that's how we're trying to incentivize people to live in shared housing. And I think that model could be picked up by other organizations. It's also true that we built the online courses so that we can sell a body and organization seats that they could then turn around and give to their people to take the classes to learn about how to do the shared housing thing. So that's so far how far I've gotten with this.
Cool. Well, it sounds like maybe what you need is like a dating app where you come up with a clever word and you remove the vowels from it, and then you call it, like shift without an I or something like that.
Right. There are many ways in which finding a good housemate is like dating or a good job. And so one of the things I say is, we're teaching a process like, people learn how to have job interviews, they learn financial advice, they learn all this kind of stuff. And we're teaching, how do you find somebody that you can be compatible with and happy with?
Yeah.
I mean, lots of people share housing and they don't think anything special about it.
Yeah, right.
Really interesting. That's just the way they live. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay. So.
Yeah, even in North America, that probably happens from time to time.
I have an I was once giving a presentation in Cleveland at the Episcopal Cathedral there. And in the front row was this elderly woman with a cane. And I was like, what is she doing here? Well, she came up to me afterwards and she said, I lived like that for 30 years and I never thought nothing of it.
Nice.
Yeah. And I interviewed her. There's a blog post about her. But yeah, I mean, she just lived. That's the way she lived, it can be a great way to live. You just have to find a compatible person, compatible enough person.
Take some care doing that. And there's known strategies for how to do that. So thank you for spelling those out for us and for writing your book. And I hope obviously I have links to your website and the resources in the show notes.
And all of that.
So I'm kind of feeling like we're getting close to wrapping this up, but I want to give you an opportunity to maybe you have exhortations for the fine people of Boulder, or maybe you have something else that we haven't covered yet.
I think the exhortation is that we tend to be afraid. We're in a culture that is fearful. Oh, I couldn't possibly live with a stranger. Oh, what if something horrible happened? What if I can't get rid of? And we have forgotten how to be a culture of love.
Yeah.
and how to say, oh, another person. What would that person add to me? What would I add to that person? And so this is very natural. It's very natural. It's very much more, it's much easier to stay comfortable where we are, even if we're not so comfortable,
Even
than
if
to
we're,
take
even if we're
it,
terribly lonely,
even if oh, and part of the problem with being terribly lonely is that one gets negative
Yeah.
and one gets it's less possible to see good things and the good
Well, and you
possibilities.
become
So
less
now,
desirable to live with
and that's
as a
true too.
consequence. Yeah.
That's true too. So my exhortation is the risk is worth it.
Yeah.
The risk is worth it. Do it with your eyes open, do it carefully,
Make
get
that phone call.
support, talk to people, but it is worth doing.
Amen. Annamarie, thank you so much for your service to humanity and for writing us an important book. And I just want for my city to be a culture of love and a place where, and something else that came up earlier. We were talking about serendipity. Maybe you didn't use that word, but just the I want to live in a city where I walk out and I see people and I bump into people, and I want to live in a house that way too. I have a family right now and I bump into my kids and my spouse, but I don't ever want to lose that. And I want that for other people. I want people to feel connected and feel belonging and feel secure
Belonging in
financially.
community.
Yeah.
Yep.
What
Yep.
was the word you used?
Belonging in
Yeah,
community.
belonging
I
in
mean, I
community.
think what can happen is that when a home share is settled and it's good for everybody, it becomes our home and
Hmm.
a place I belong. And that's really important.
That's beautiful. Thanks so much, Annamarie.
You
Appreciate
are
it.
most welcome, Philip. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder.
Thank you for listening to Sharing Boulder. Please support the podcast by sharing it with your friends and neighbors. You can contact me at linktree.com/philipogren, which you can find by visiting sharingboulder.us, where you can also find show notes and previous episodes. This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced and edited by Philip Ogren. The music was created by Nathaniel Ogren and Sack Lunch. Keep sharing, Boulder.